As the next speaker, I invite Lasma Iveska, and the most interesting what Lasma is doing is slightly related with what I've been doing alongside with the work in architecture's office. We really loved to make presentations and lectures from different smart people that come to teach students in Latvia and to show that for people, for normal people in daily life. Lasma does that as well, and Lasma conducts researchers, and she will tell us how neighborhood residents communicate with Riga City, Riga Port, Freeport. Please, Lasma, the floor is yours. Hello, everyone. My name is Lasma, and I will continue with society engagement theme, and I will talk with Riga Freeport, the Freeport Authority, and communication with associations of neighborhood. Before I start, I would like to make a reservation why it is important to think about neighborhoods associations as a particular category, because right now we are talking about organizations that unite inhabitants that want to improve their surrounding environment. And why do talk about them like an organization separately than individuals? There are three reasons for that. There is a suggestion filter through which the inhabitants submit their suggestions, proposals, and the associations then analyze which suggestions would be beneficial and topical for big portion, at least, of inhabitants. Another one is long-term vision. Again, when you know what neighborhood residents are looking for, you know what is a priority number 1, 2, and so. The third issue about availability of engagement, involvement. Associations give possibility to access public structures and organizations to those groups which are sort of segregated, citizens, immigrants, not mastering official language, whatever. So through these associations, they have a possibility to express their opinion. If we look at these three functions, these are the ones that traditionally were under the responsibility of municipalities, and neighborhood associations partly carry out this function of municipalities. So municipalities should be quite lucky that there are such associations that try to organize the way in a structured way. We have 19 active associations. If we talk about neighborhoods next to the Freeport, then from 10 that are bordering Freeport territories, there are 5 active associations. In the nearest future, we could expect that the number of those associations could grow, because if you look at the 19 which are active right now, have been established during the last 3 years. If we look at the strategic position of Riga City Council and Riga Freeport Authority, then the positive tendency is that for both of them there is a positive attitude towards the cooperation with the associations, at least in those strategies. And they mentioned that continuous partnership should be developed for achievement of a strategic goal number 8, to strengthen the port as socially responsible institution. On the paper, everything seems great, but it is important to look what is the reality. And therefore, I approached 5 neighborhood associations that are next to the Freeport territory to understand what is a real assessment about communication with the Riga Freeport authority, like availability, ease and speed of communication, and feedback. The result, the average assessment is 6.4, almost good. And the answers we got are quite different. We have 10, we have 8, 5, 1, showing that there are some issues Riga Freeport Authority is doing well enough, and some where there is still a big place for improvement. For comparison, I would like to mention also assessment of associations concerning communication with Riga City structural units. The research was carried out at the end of last year. 15 associations answered. The average assessment was 5.6. So if we round it up, it's close to 6.4, almost good, but nevertheless, Freeport Authority is slightly dominating. In the next part of my presentation, I would like to touch upon 4 structural problems that have been told to me by the neighborhood associations. So which things could be done differently, and how could we raise 1s to 8s or 8s to 10s? One issue is that Riga Freeport Authority is making impression that the cooperation with associations is like a part of their public relation campaign. First of all, we have to understand whether we talk about the Freeport Authority as an enterprise or administration institution, and it is administration institution. It's not Latvijas Valsts Meži or Latvijas State Forest, which is a limited liability company, or Air Baltic, or Rotterdam Port, which is a separate company. And the fact that Riga Freeport is an administration institution also develops this cooperation. Companies may do a voluntary job or charity job. Administration institutions do not do that. Their main aim is to delegate their functions, because NGOs or any private companies carrying out those functions help to realize strategic aims of the city. For example, Culture Capital Fund is a simple example. For the government, it is important that the culture sector is blooming, that we have new art works. At the same time, the government, the state itself, is not making those pieces of art. So it is delegating it to someone else, giving financing. So a Riga Freeport Authority is delegating the financing or developing common projects, but it's not sponsoring, it's not charity, it's not creating a good reputation, it's really delegation of functions. So, but where are the problems then? If we compare the Freeport with a company which is sponsoring others, that imposes default commitment, default liability, because it's not good to speak bad about the companies that could do something good for you. So the fact itself that there are neighborhood associations that are doubting whether attraction of financing would not impose on them default liabilities is problematic by itself, and in democratic society it should not be like that. At the same time, I know that Freeport is introducing some changes in their structure and strategy, and there have been some secret meetings like we need to know and think about. Another problem which is not unique to Riga Freeport but also to Riga Council structural units. No particular cooperation system has been defined. This cooperation is based on the projects and enthusiasm and interest of particular employees. One of the examples is that one of the associations mentioned that improvement in the communication with Riga Freeport Authority was when the manager of the Riga Freeport was changed. With the previous manager, the communication was not possible. So again, it shows the problem that the attitude of the employees should be oriented on cooperation, because only with a wish to cooperate, it's not enough. There are thousands and thousands of cooperation models developed that would facilitate engagement, but the problem is that there are so many of them, because it's not an easy task. This idea about creating a system for cooperation has already been included in the previous development program of Riga Freeport. Unfortunately, that was not implemented. Nevertheless, I invite you to think about that. In case when we have turnover of 5 employees, the cooperation continues. Nevertheless, a cooperation mechanism should not be complicated. There could be a written agreement that we have a meeting twice a year when we together create a long-term plan for a particular neighborhood and look how different scenarios of port development could influence them, and so on. And the third problem, and I really liked the total vision of today's conference concerning development of Riga port for the next 10 years. Nevertheless, the problem is there that up till now neighborhood associations have not been involved in the planning of this development. And that is also the issue we should change, because if we communicate with inhabitants or associations post factum when the program has been already developed, then that always leads to the problems, and to introduce the changes it's much more complicated. Also, it's important to note that during the last 15 years there have been several litigations that were related with the counter-reaction of inhabitants with the development tendencies or visions of the port on the left bank of Daugava River. So they really should be involved in the planning, so their concerns and suggestions are included in the final version. And this not involvement in the planning is closely related with the previous issue, that the cooperation system is not defined. And the fourth problem, and that is more like a suggestion, to raise the assessment levels from 8 to 10 and up, is that Riga City Council and Riga Freeport Authority should communicate more and more successfully. Because according to the information that I have compiled, in principle, Riga City Council and Riga Freeport Authority has more or less harmonized goals for the neighborhoods. Nevertheless, the realization in practice is not as successful. Riga Freeport mentioned why they are quite cautious towards development of new greeneries or sporting places in neighborhoods, that there is no one who will maintain and manage them after that. And that's a great way how to cooperate with Riga City Council, because they have such structural units that plan and maintain the neighborhood territories. So I would invite Riga City Council to sit at the discussion table as well. That would also be exchange of information, and that would provide for regular exchange of information between Riga City Council and Riga Freeport Authority. Because sometimes it happens that you are actively discussing your plan and another party is actively discussing its plan, and you just wasted your time. So I really invite Riga Freeport Authority and Riga City Council to sit by the table and discuss and find the places of miscommunication. So, in general, the tendency for the last 20 years is positive, oriented towards cooperation from the part of Freeport Authority and from the associations. When we asked whether the associations have noticed improvements in communication with the Riga Freeport Authority, then the 4 of them mentioned that they really saw great positive tendencies or some positive tendencies. One association said no changes. Nevertheless, if 4 have said a positive tendency and noticed, it's good. In the previous cooperation plan, that was Riga Freeport Development Strategy from 1996 till 2010, then the engagement of society was not included at all. So the next step, strategy of 2009-2018, the idea about involvement of inhabitants is already there. And then we see the year 2017, when the associations of neighborhood are already involved in the social responsibility policy. Those blue dots in this time arrow are the numbers of associations, and you can see that inhabitants are becoming more active and are developing communities and associations with which and through which to work with public institutions. We have to revise the marketing and public relations strategy. We have to develop the clear communication roadmap. We have to develop regular exchange of information with the Riga City Council and to involve inhabitants in the planning processes. Thank you. The last slide was very interesting and rather tricky, because that's the question I wanted to ask you. How you see our development tendencies within the time frame. Nevertheless, I still have one question I'm eager to ask, and I apologize to all present persons and associations, but you talked a lot. Nevertheless, what kind of suggestions you would give to the port? Like in every relationship we have had with some strains, there are 2 parties. Did you have the feeling of the other party, what kind of suggestion to give them, or they can give to us? Of course, in ideal scenario, all our neighborhood associations would come to us with long-term plans, with visualizations, with clearly defined priorities. Nevertheless, we have to understand that these are organizations in which people are not working. That's their voluntarily job. So to request from them completely developed plan would be wrong. So, and they are not receiving any financing, so it's not really correct to ask from them big work, big responsibility. At the same time, I would suggest them not to deny this cooperation communication, which some of the associations have chosen to do. That's a very good advice for everyone. Are there any questions from the audience? Yes, and there is at least one. Hi, as usually I have a question. Participation probably is like a game, and we know that the rules of the game could influence the result of the game very much. And when we look at this participation strategy, all inhabitants are invited, of course. At the same time, we are lacking easy participation way and strategy which is developed together with the inhabitants. Currently, it happens like we are developing the strategy and you now have to engage in this strategy in the way that's convenient to us. So, do you think the same? Or still our inhabitants are participating in development of the strategy? The question is whether inhabitants participate in development of participation strategy, and is it happening like that? It should happen like that. This idea about the Freeport, that Freeport could include communication mechanisms in this planning phase. How to do that? It should be cooperation with the neighborhood associations and inhabitants. But the problem is that it is so difficult to address, to reach the inhabitants who are living in the neighborhood. You don't know who has some constructive opinion, who is willing and who is not. And the bonus for the association is that they are there and they can participate and be involved in those processes. And the Freeport Authority mentioned that it is not cooperating with the 5 neighborhood associations because they have no initiatives, no suggestions coming out of them. But nevertheless, civil organizations should be part of participation strategy development. No one else is eager to ask any questions, so thank you for the presentation.